So we're going to start with So let's do a quick recap of what the DNS is. DNS stands for Domain Name System. And this is the way that domain names that we may remember are turned into IP addresses. So if you enter Microsoft.com into your browser, that resolves to this IP address, and you don't have to remember that address. The other important thing is, of course, the address can change. Let's say you want to move servers, and so you create a new server with a new IP address, and all you have to do is update the directory to give the new address, and then people will start going to that machine over time. There is some complexities to the global DNS system on how things are cached and things are not updated instantly around the world and things like that. But we don't have to worry about that for now. So the DNS resolves human rememberable domain names to non-rememberable IP addresses. Within Azure, you have a number of options. You can obviously provide your own DNS services, host it elsewhere, maybe your registrar, maybe on your own premises. You can use the private DNS services within Azure. We'll talk about that. You can use a public DNS service that we'll talk about. And there's even a domain, app domains, which we'll talk about. So the bring your own DNS, or the externally hosted domain name server, is basically the custom domain. So it could be mycompany.com, gets resolved to an IP address before that traffic reaches Azure. So the user enters yourcompany.com into their browser, and some other service, which could be your registrar, could be hosted at your own site, does that work. And then the traffic that comes to Azure already has that resolved. Pretty straightforward. Now, the total opposite of that is the private DNS, where you have a virtual network inside of Azure, and you want to resolve things to various domain names, but it's not publicly accessible. And so you can, basically, that's the key to know about that, is you have servers within your own environment that may have their own names for things, and it's not available to anyone outside of Azure. Now, I like to say there are no rules. There are rules, but there are basically no rules. You don't have to register this custom domain with any registry. That means if you want to be cheeky, as the British say, you can use Microsoft.com as your own private DNS. You can name your servers database.microsoft.com, website.microsoft.com, something else.microsoft.com inside your Azure private network. Again, it doesn't affect anything outside of your network. And so what that does is it actually might break some things, because if your web server wants to go to Microsoft.com to do an update, for instance, then you've overridden the DNS with your private DNS. That is more commonly done for dev.local, production.local, staging.local. You can create labels for servers that only have private IP addresses and don't have public IP addresses. The public DNS is very similar to the bring your own DNS. It's just working like your register would, but it's available within Azure. We have a video coming up talking about these things, demonstrating them. And finally, there is something called the Azure Domain Services, where you can, if you need a domain, you can pay money for a custom domain, yourcompany.com, if it's available, and associate that with an Azure App Service. So those are the options currently within Microsoft Azure relating to DNS. In the next couple of videos, I will demonstrate to you private, public, and also the domain services. With the private DNS, let's start for, we're looking for a DNS zone. We don't have any, so we're going to create a private DNS zone. does need a resource group. I'm going to put it into a new one. Now, in order for the instance to be valid, it has to have 2 or more names with a period in between. And so, remember I was saying in the last video, you could have like dev.local, production.local. Here in this example, I'm putting dns-demo.local. And it's only going to be valid for me. If my friend wanted to access this and he didn't have access to this virtual network, then he's not going to be able to see this domain. So it can be anything. If I wanted to configure my DNS already, I could, but I'm not going to do that. I'll do this one at a time here. So let's create the zone. Let that run. All right, I can say go to resource. Now, in order for this to be useful, it's going to have to be associated to a virtual network. So I'm going to create a virtual network here. Put it into my existing theme. I'll call it DNS Demo VNet. I'm not going to be too concerned with the encryption with whatever range of IP addresses it's chosen, because this is just a demo. Let's say create. All right, so we have an empty virtual network. We could obviously go to our DNS zone under DNS management, and we can associate our brand new DNS demo VNet with this particular DNS zone. I also want to enable auto registration in this particular case, which means that as you create virtual machines and attach it to the network, it automatically gets added to your DNS here. So I'm going to say create. While that's going, I'm going to demonstrate this. I'm going to create a virtual machine here. Put this into my resource group. I'm going to leave this as simple as possible. Now, the only thing I care about is it's going to be attached to the virtual network that's using the private DNS. So I'm going to say, I was disable boot diagnostics, and I say review and create. So we'll let this VM create and come back in a second. I always find it interesting how fast this goes, in which we basically have a virtual machine available to us in 21 seconds. That's incredible. But we're not concerned about the VM at this time. We're going to go back to the DNS zone, and we're going to go into the records. And we can see that the VM that we just created is already registered to this DNS zone. So what this means is, internal to this network, we can refer to this VM as DNS demo-VM, because that is the automatically given DNS, or we've got this.dns.local as a name. Now, the fact that we're auto-registering doesn't really add us a lot of convenience, because if you know the full name of the VM, then you don't need a private DNS in order to access it. But what becomes interesting is if this is the dev machine, okay, then you can add a custom name, dev.dns name.dsdemo.local. And you're going to then have it as the, I think it's 10.04 was the number if I remember it. It is. So now I have dev.dnsdemo.local, and that's much easier to remember. And so no matter what this VM, and even if this VM gets destroyed and gets re-added and the IP address ends up changing and all this stuff, I've got a consistent private DNS name that I can refer to it as. So that's the essence of the private DNS zone. With the public DNS service within Azure, also known as DNS zones, you can take your public domain name, mycompany.com for instance, and have Microsoft Azure determine which servers are responding to which names. So these are called DNS zones. We can create this as a new domain. So let's say you can't use Microsoft Azure to register the domain, but if you already have it, and you have mycompany.com, you can create this as a zone. Let's not upload the contents of that yet. So it's going to be created with 0 records. Now, in order for Microsoft Azure to be recognized by anyone else as the owner, manager of this domain name, you're going to Now, in order for Microsoft Azure to be recognized by anyone else as the owner, manager of this domain name, you're going to have to provide this name servers to your registrar. So you go to your registrar, whatever company you use to register the domain, and you're going to provide all 4 of these .com, .net, .org, and .infos as name servers, at least the first 2, but up to 4 for maximum redundancy. Now, just like with the private DNS, what we end up with are record sets. And so just like with any public registrar having a name server service, you can add your A records, your CNAME records, your mail MEMX records, TXTs if you need. So Microsoft Public DNS supports all of these record types. And whether or not the servers are hosted by Azure or not hosted by Azure, it has to have a public IP address. There's no point having a public DNS pointing to a private address. It's not going to work. So pretty much this is how we're going to create records within our public DNS. Commonly, it will be for www. It'll be for the @ symbol, which represents the root of the host. You could have your mail server being mail dot or FTP servers FTP dot. You'll see this is how subdomains are added to your main domain, and Microsoft Azure can handle this for you. So one of the requirements of the exam is to associate a custom domain name with an app service. If I go into this app service, which I just created, you can see that it has a name, and Microsoft has appended some random letters to it in order to make it unique, because finding a unique domain name is very difficult these days. So it's all of these letters, .canadacentral.-01-azurewebsites.net. This is not something you want to share with clients or with important people, maybe your coworkers, and that's about it. So how do you associate this with a custom domain, which could be mycompany.com? Well, there's at least 3 ways to do this, and I'll talk about that. The first way we just saw a glimpse of when we created a our own DNS zone, public DNS. So if we went into the record and we added a CNAME record, which is a link to the subdomain, and I called this mywebsite.mycompany.com, or more commonly www, right, mycompany.com, I can then paste that full website URL into the alias section, and that will effectively redirect the domain www.mycompany.com to this alias. That's one way to do it. You can do this also in your own hosted DNS. If you're using your registrar's DNS, you can do the same thing. Just do a CNAME. The second way to do it is to go into the web app, and under settings, we have custom domains. Under custom domain, we can, under all other domain services, we can add our my domains. Under custom domain, we can, under all other domain services, we can add our mycompany.com, and it will suggest to us that we can go to our registrar and we can add the A record, and we have to do this TXT to prove that we own it. And if we do that, it's going to respond to mycompany.com. It needs to, because the IP addresses are shared, it needs to know what addresses to respond to. So to get this A record, which is without the www, you need to do it this way, okay, for other registrars. You can also do this using the Azure Public DNS for the A record. If you do want the www, it's just, like I said, a CNAME record is an option. But you, again, we go in here, we put this into your public DNS for the A record. If you do want the www, it's just, like I said, a CNAME record is an option. But you, again, we go in here, we put this into a CNAME record, as well as this TXT to prove that you own it. We also have an A record option for this www, where the host contains that. So that's the second way that you can associate a custom domain with a web app. The third way, I think it's the way that Microsoft wants us to talk about, which is this concept of the app service domain. Now, the app service domain is basically a domain registration service within Azure. I can even close that and just say by app service domain. Now, this is where I enter some text, and it has to see if this domain is available. Now, if I enter something that I know is available, then it's going to say the domain is available. If I enter something that is likely not available, then it's going to basically make some suggestions for me. We can, AZ zone, AZ fit, things like that. So we can use this method to register a domain. It's $11.99 per year to register a domain, and that'll get associated with our app service as well. So you have three ways of associating a custom domain with an app service.